Hello, Pearls. Today I'm sharing a story about a 10-year-old boy, Takoda Collins from Dayton, Ohio. It's probably the most heartbreaking story in all of my time that I've covered true crime. There's been a lot of them. Takoda Collins was just 10 years old when his life ended in December 2019. He was described by those who knew him as a bright and loving child, but his life behind closed doors was anything but happy. Takoda was born in 2009. For the first few years of his life, he lived with his mother and siblings in Wisconsin. He was a joyful child who loved playing outside and spending time with his siblings. Takoda was described as a bright boy, lots of energies, and loved to make others laugh. Takoda's mother faced numerous personal and legal challenges that impacted her ability to care for her son, Takoda. Takoda's story began in Wisconsin when he was born in 2008. His mother, Robin Collins, lost custody of him in Dane County family courts after abusing him when he was just an 11-month-old baby. The incident resulted in probation for Robin and her subsequent violation of probation due to drug use led by her imprisonment. During her incarceration, Takoda was placed in foster care according to his grandmother. His father would eventually be awarded custody of him in 2013 while building his own criminal history. While in prison, Robin attempted to regain custody of her son. She expressed a strong desire for her family to take Takoda, but the efforts were unsuccessful. In October 2013, Takoda's father, Al Mudahan McLean, was granted sole custody of him. Despite Robin's objections and concerns about Mr. McLean's treatment of Takoda, McLean was allowed to move Takoda out of Wisconsin without proper oversight for child welfare services. A Dane County judge awarded McLean with custody. At the time, he pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor for beating and choking a man. 3 days after the custody decision, court records show that he was charged with another crime, attempted to unalive his fiancée with a metal pole. Those charges were dismissed when the victim didn't cooperate. When McLean took custody of Takoda in 2016, he was expected to provide a stable and nurturing environment. However, he did anything but provide Takoda with any sort of stability or nurturing environment. After Takoda moved to Ohio, Robin, Takoda's mother, maintained contact with him as much as possible. However, as time passed, she began to notice changes in their communication. The frequency of calls and visits diminished, and she grew increasingly concerned about the well being of her son. Dakota would be staying with his father, Mr. McLean, fiance Amanda Heinze, and her sister, Jennifer Ubert. This move would mark the beginning of a harrowing chapter in Dakota's life. Amanda Hensey, McLean's fiancée, background is less documented, but what we know is she moved into the household with her sister, Jennifer Ubert, and McLean. Their relationship dynamics and living situation created an environment where the abuse of Takoda went unchecked. What happened behind closed doors of Collins and McLean's household was nothing short of a nightmare. Takoda endured years of abuse at the hands of those who were supposed to care for him. McLean, Amanda, and Jennifer subjected Takoda to unimaginable cruelty. On May 11, 2018, Dayton Public School worker and Montgomery County Children's Services requested a welfare check on Takoda because of fears he was being abused. Police responded to the Kensington Drive house and got no answer at the door. Robin reported her suspicions of abuse to authorities on several occasions. On May 14, 2019, she called 911 from Wisconsin to report that she believed McLean was abusing Takoda and preventing him from speaking out. Despite those reports, welfare checks by authorities often found no immediate signs of abuse, partly due to privacy laws. There had been multiple CPS calls during Takoda's time in school from teachers and faculty. Takoda would come to school with soiled clothes. The teachers would put out fresh clothes on him, send him to the school nurse, and offer Takoda's father help in supplying clothes that other means of help for Takoda. But McLean was enraged and rejected the offer. Takoda's school, try as they might, nothing ever seemed to be done after calling CPS countless time. So you can imagine by July 2019, McLean officially filed paperwork to withdraw Takoda from public schools, claiming that he was going to homeschool Takoda. This is such a tragic story that reveals the darkest corners of human cruelty. Takoda was routinely beaten, starved, and forced to perform strenuous exercises for hours. He was locked in an attic, denied basic human necessities. The abuse was both physical and emotional, leaving Takoda broken and constantly in fear. Takoda's life was marred by relentlessly physical abuse. McLean frequently used belts, sticks, and other objects on Takoda. Takoda endured several beatings that left him with multiple bruises, cuts, and injuries all over his body. He was made to do push ups, sit ups, squats until he could no longer stand. The physical toll on this young body was immense, leaving him in constant pain and exhaustion. Takoda was often locked in an attic naked without the basic necessities. The condition he lived in were described as hellish. McLean used what is believed to be a table leg to assault Takoda in the backside. If that wasn't bad enough, he would drench the table leg with hot sauce. Truly depraved. Unreal. When police visited the home in Takoda's room, they found a tarp on the floor and a plastic kids' pool. The tarp was used for Takoda's bedding, and the pool was used for Takoda's bathroom. He was also deprived of adequate clothing and hygiene. Takoda was forced to wear soiled clothes for extended periods of time and was not allowed to bathe regularly. This neglect left him vulnerable for infection and further degraded his physical and mental health. The emotional and psychological abuse Takoda suffered was just as harrowing. McLean, his girlfriend, and his girlfriend's sister subjected Takoda to constant verbal assaults, calling him derogatory names and belittling him. This relentless emotional abuse shattered Takoda's self esteem and left him feeling worthless. On the tragic day, December 13th, 2019, McLean calls 911 to report his son, Takoda Collins, as unresponsive. McLean made the call at approximately 8 p.m., expressing concerns over his son's condition. When emergency service arrived, they found Takoda in a critical state, and he was subsequently pronounced dead at Dayton Children's Hospital. During police interrogation, McLean attempted to present a narrative that Takoda's injuries were self inflicted. He claimed that Takoda had a history of running into walls and intentionally hurting himself. McLean admitted to using military style exercises as discipline, but minimized their severity. McLean also mentioned that Takoda often injured himself by rolling downstairs and banging his head against the walls. However, the evidence gathered by investigators painted a much darker picture. Takoda had endured prolonged and severe abuse, including being locked in the attic, beaten with belts and other objects, and subjected to forced, strenuous exercise. The autopsy revealed that Takoda suffered from blunt force trauma, compressive asphyxia, and water submersion, which contradicted McLean's statement about the injuries being self inflicted. Despite the severity of abuse, there were missed opportunities to save Takoda. Neighbors reported hearing disturbing sounds from the home. There were CPS calls made by teachers and faculty. However, these visits failed to uncover the fullest extent of the abuse due to the manipulative actions of McLean and the adults in the home. The Montgomery County coroner determined that Dakota's cause of death was due to blunt force trauma, compressive asphyxia, and water submersion. The death was ruled a homicide. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma injuries, including cuts, bruises, and a pattern injuries all over his body, indicating repetitive abuse. Takoda had also multiple rib fractures and signs of compressive injuries around his neck. In the final hours, Takoda was physically assaulted by his father, who punched and elbowed him, forced him into painful punishment pose, poured hot sauce on him, and ultimately submerged him in the bathtub, leading to his death by drowning. The autopsy revealed multiple blunt force injuries, including abrasions, contusions, and lacerations on Dakota's head, torso, and extremities. The pattern injuries indicated repetitive trauma with distinct patterns suggest that the use of objects to inflict harm. Takoda suffered from compression asphyxia, which occurs when external pressure prevents normal breathing. This was the result of his father standing on his back with his full body weight. The final act of abuse involving submerging Takoda in a bathtub, leading to drowning, this was compounded by the other forms of physical abuse he endured shortly before his death. Autopsy also found multiple healing fractures, indicating a history of repeated abuse over an extended period. McLean, Hinsey, and Ebert were arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including murder, kidnapping, and endangering a child. The community was left shocked and mourning the loss of a young life taken so cruelly. During the sentencing, Montgomery County Judge Dennis Atkins did not mince his words. He described McLean's actions as, quote, pure evil, and stated that McLean showed no mercy to his son and therefore he deserves none from the court. The court heard harrowing details of the abuse Dakota endured. Prosecutors detailed how Dakota was locked in an attic, beaten regularly, and forced to perform strenuous exercises and subjected to various forms of torture. The medical examiner's report revealed that Dakota suffered tremendously. Prosecutor Matt Heck Jr. highlighted the systematic failures that allowed the abuse to continue unchecked. He emphasized the importance of reform to increase vigilance and that has been implemented to prevent such tragedies in the future. Heck also acknowledged the efforts of teachers, caseworkers, and law enforcement in trying to protect Dakota, even though their attempts were ultimately unsuccessful. McLean's defense attorney, Michael Boer, argued that McLean accepted responsibility for his son's death, but contended that the abuse did not span over years, as the prosecutors claim. Despite this, the overwhelming evidence and McLean's own admission painted a clear picture of prolonged and severe abuse. McLean was charged with murder, rape, Kidnapping, child endangerment. McLean pled guilty to the charges and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 51 years. Judge Dennis Adkins, during the sentencing, described McLean's actions as pure evil and noted the severity and prolonged nature of the abuse for Takoda endured. Amanda Hensey pled guilty to the charges and was sentenced to 22 to 27 and a half years in prison. Prosecutors indicated that she facilitated the abuse and did nothing to prevent or stop it, thus contributing significantly to Takoda's suffering and death. Jennifer Ebert pled guilty to the charges and was sentenced to 8 to 12 years in prison. Like Hensey, Ebert was implicated in her role in allowing abuse to continue without intervention. These convictions highlight the serious legal repercussions for those involved in this horrific abuse and neglect that led to Dakota's Collins' death. The case was also prompted significant reform in the Child Protective Services and legislative measures to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Dakota's tragic story brought attention to the flaws in the child protective system and highlighted the importance of vigilance in protecting vulnerable children. It sparked conversations about how such abuse could go unnoticed for so long and what measures could be taken to prevent similar tragedies in the future. In Dayton, the community came together to remember Takoda. Vigils were held and memorial was established in his honor. People donated to charities aimed to preventing child abuse and initiatives were launched in order to strengthen child protective services. Takoda's life was filled with pain and suffering, but his memory lives on, a reminder that the importance of protecting our children. His story is a call to action for all of us to be more vigilant, more compassionate, and more proactive in ensuring the safety and well being of every child. If you suspect a child of being abused, please speak up. Contact your local child protective services or law enforcement. Together, we can and will make a difference.